From the grind to the glory, one man's journey proves that heart, hustle, and determination change the game. This is Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., where adversity is met head-on and champions are made. Here's George.
Welcome to Catch as Catch Can. I'm George Tinsley Sr., former professional athlete, entrepreneur, author, and your host. This is a space where we sit down with leaders who face real challenges, learned real lessons, and kept moving forward.
Turning obstacles into opportunity.
Joining me today is Dennis McKinley, a seasoned entrepreneur and investor with over 20 years of experience building and scaling brands. He has successfully built and exited 5 companies, including the original hot dog factory, and currently serves as Executive Vice President of Business Development at Rolling Out. A University of Michigan graduate, Dennis is known for his decisive leadership and his growth-driven mindset. Dennis, we welcome you to the podcast.
How are we doing today, sir?
Doing great, young man. We've been excited about having you on the podcast, so I'm glad we can finally get this going. I want to start off with saying that is an outstanding background you have there. So our team was commenting on it while you were stepped away there, so we're glad to have you. Our podcast is about turning obstacles to opportunities, and my latest book that I wrote was Catch as Catch Can, which is basically turning obstacles to opportunity. And so our guests, we like to dig deep and let the audience know that most successful people have obstacles that they overcome as they pursue their success story. So I want to start off with you, and I got to tell you, I've heard you before, and that's why I've been excited about having you on the podcast. Why don't we start, just kind of walk us through how you got started as an early youth, because I think your story is a very interesting story.
I appreciate that, Mr. Tinsley. Thank you for having me. When I was in high school, one of my neighbors owned a McDonald's. Her name was Tina Brundage, and I used to see her get up early in the morning, 5 a.m., and back out of the driveway. And I would always wonder, like, what is she doing? Because I would go to school, I had a part-time job, and I still didn't see her at night. And I would see a light come on out the window in the driveway. About 2 o'clock in the morning, she was getting back in the driveway. And I always wondered, what she did for a living. And one day I ran outside and I said, Ms. Brundage, I see you leaving early and you come back late. Like, what do you do? He said, well, me and my husband own a McDonald's, and, we got, 3 different day parts. We got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got to make sure, I'm there in all 3 day parts. And that was just, really, really engaging for me, because I didn't know any entrepreneurs. I only knew what I saw on TV. If you want to be successful, you be a doctor or a lawyer. We all watched Cliff Huxtable growing up, and I thought that's all that was available, to us. So that was my first real taste of entrepreneurship. And from that point, I really knew that there's something else out there besides just, being a professional or working a 9 to 5, So that was my real first taste of entrepreneurship.
Okay. So what age group were you at this time?
I was about 15. I was about 15 years old. And,
okay. So you're in high school?
In high school.
High school. Okay. And tell us about what you were doing in high school. Were you participating in athletics? Were you academically inclined? I see the smile on your face. So
yeah. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I was always at the head of my class. Academics was really, really easy for me. If anybody knows anything about Detroit, it's really 3 main high schools out there: Cass Tech, Renaissance, and King. I went to Cass Tech, and that was my real taste of, school is real and school should be hard. And unfortunately, we moved from Detroit. I say unfortunately because I loved the city of Detroit, but we moved to Southfield, went to Southfield later. And I always just worked odd jobs, always played sports, always had so many different things going on. But at that point I said, Ms. Brundage, I want to learn from you. And she gave me a job, and from that point on, I would just go to work with her in the morning at 6. Even when I was missing school sometimes, it just was that part of life I just never saw before. So I knew at that point I would just be in entrepreneurship.
That's very, very interesting. A lot of our early Black franchisees came out of the Detroit area. KFC franchisee Brady Keys, Burger King franchisee Brady Keys, and a couple of other guys there, and of course the McDonald's franchisee. So that's very interesting that you came along during that time.
I mean, that was a big heyday. I mean, we had a lot of entrepreneurs in Detroit that were franchisees. We had LeVan Hawkins. We had family out of Milwaukee. They had a ton of, Burger Kings. Yeah, so, it was fun back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Needless to not mention Dave Bean. Who was the godfather of, and there was another guy that was a professional football player that had a car dealership there also. Mel Farr, yes.
So we had a few entrepreneurs that, were nationally known entrepreneurs. Mel Farr, really good friends with his kids today. They all live in Atlanta. So, yep.
Okay. Well, that's great. Brady was my mentor as I got into the business, KFC business, that is, and found out more about what he was doing and his success and so forth. He was probably the first Black franchisee in the KFC business back in the day. He and another guy. So you're going to work at McDonald's. You're learning the business. You're watching your neighbor as she's working, and the skills you're picking up some of those skills, and you still are getting your education. You're a very smart young man, and you're getting that done. Tell me how that all kind of unfolded to your next step.
Yeah, so at that point, I really had a taste of what entrepreneurship was. Not only the work ethic, I learned how to count cash. I learned how to, I guess you can call it quality control. All those things I learned early on that really had an impact on what would become, I didn't know, my later career. Graduated from South Lathrop. I played all sports, and I had a few scholarship offers to go to school down south. But at that point, I really didn't want to leave my family, and I had some options. So to the University of Michigan, I went. Go Blue. Yeah. Go Blue. So, and I was really, at that time, we were at the 5-5 era, Jalen Rose and those guys. I was really, really thought it was cool. And unfortunately, Michigan is a tough school to get into. I was privileged enough to have the grades and et cetera to get in. So I got into the University of Michigan, came out in 2005. And all through school, though, I was into real estate. I bought some laundromats, and at that time, everything was switching over from cash to digital. I was fortunate enough to kind of string together an unofficial franchise. There were more licensing, I guess you can call it there. Made some money there. And after I, left college, I said, you know what, let me, figure out what my next step was. And unknowingly, I got into the hair business after college.
Yeah. Let me bounce back. You mentioned you learned how to count cash. Tell the audience what you mean by that.
Yeah, so the cash counting business is a science within itself. If you talk to any restaurant, tour, they'll tell you that counting, back then they called it the till. Counting the till was very, very important, because if you hired the wrong person and they knew how to count the till better than you would be, so you're spending all night trying to scratch your head and understanding where the money was. So a very important early lesson I learned was to learn how to count a drawer, right? Match it up with the transactions and make sure the till was correct. And I've just met so many managers and young kids over the course of my 20 years in the hospitality and restaurant business that just don't know how to count a till. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, you're in the hospitality and restaurant business, now it's easier because everything mostly is digital. But back then it was all cash. If you didn't know how to count that register, you'd be out of business faster than you know.
Yeah. Not only the cashier counting the cash register, but the manager double checking in there, watching the count and watching sure the tape that they run the tapes, not the cashier run the tape, and also that it all balances. Yes. You hit a very, that's why I want you to go back through it, because that's a very key point. And I'm sure the customer service piece was important as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be a part of a conglomerate like McDonald's, where you actually had to, if you wanted to be an owner, and it's still present today, they called it McDonald's University. And not only did you need to make sure you understood how to make the burgers correctly and count the cash, they taught you about real estate. They taught you about customer service. I mean, the whole 9 yards. So I was very privileged at an early age to just learn from an organization like McDonald's and the Brundage family.
Right. Well, understanding, just to take it a little step further, with the McDonald's franchise concept, McDonald's can lock your doors very, very quickly if you're not adhering to all of the contractual agreements that you have. So McDonald's being a real estate company primarily, and the way the agreements work with the franchisees, all the things that you mentioned were extremely important. And franchisees have to go to McDonald's University to get that training before they actually open their doors. And they will shut you down.
They will shut you down. Listen, in addition to counting cash and quality control and customer service, things are important to the McDonald's franchise. Look, I learned at an early age that if you want to compete at a high level, you need to learn and really know how to follow the rules. And
right.
It's I mean, I'm surprised when I go into restaurants and I can just automatically tell the SOPs, standard operating procedures are not in place. I can tell because they're not following the rules. That's one thing I learned early. If you want to operate at a high level, you have to set rules and you have to follow.
Yeah, but that's one of the things that I'm sure that you ran into is a lot of some owners, early owners, they would get a brand, and that brand may be KFC, that brand may be McDonald's, but all of a sudden they wanted to be McKinley.
Yes.
Burgers. They wanted to add a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. And to your point, people that are in that business, you can walk in matter of fact, you can drive in the parking lot and you can tell, whether things are functioning properly just by the smell of the restaurant,
Yeah. I mean, not to fast forward too much, but even in my franchise journey, I would walk into restaurants and there's extra cheese on the bun that's not on the recipe. It's seasoning all of a sudden on the fries that's, nobody approved. It's just funny how people will buy into a franchise concept and they understand these rules, but they think that maybe their idea is better. And not to say their ideas may not better. One thing we learned at McDonald's, there were some franchisees that contributed to the menu, et cetera, success of McDonald's over the course of history, but that's a rare occurrence.
Yeah. Well, it's important to get those things approved as you think through them and adding them to them. I always tell a lot of franchisees, you stick to what the guidelines are, but you add your own character and personality to the brand that makes customers want to come and make them feel comfortable about spending their money, and they're going to return more than, less than 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the road, whatever the average is today. If you can get those people back in every week, then your sales are going to get above the norm, So
1,000%. When you mentioned some of those entrepreneurs that were famous in Detroit, that's why we went there. LeVan Hawkins had his own style, even though it was a piece of hut. He came out with the big suit. That's why we went there. So 1,000%. Follow the rules, but add your own character.
Yeah, exactly. That's LeVan Hawkins. That's a name that just jumps out at me also. So you're in college, you said you were doing some licensing work with laundromats and so forth. How were you able to work that into your schedule?
You know what? The good thing about college, which I really appreciate, especially University of Michigan, you grew up really fast. You have homework to do. It's due by a certain day, and we're not going to hold your hand. As a matter of fact, here is the college syllabus that we're going to give you guys. This is what you need to get done by next week, and we expect you to have it done. And that really taught me a lot about life, which is kind of what my motto is today: don't wait on nobody. Listen, life comes at you fast, and you have only 24 hours in the day to get as much as you can. It's about time management, it's about ambition, and it's about sticking to a script. So I would go to class, I would get the clip notes from my friends, and they would say, "Hey man, we'll see you next week," because they knew I wasn't coming to the rest of the classes. I would take that time on Tuesday, Wednesday. I would go back to the city. I would work on some entrepreneurial ideas I had, And I told the guys I'll meet them back for study hall on Thursday night. And that's how I got through college,
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, really that simple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You say really that simple, but that's not the average. Where did that come from, Dennis? Where in your desire to be successful and commitment to block out a lot of other extracurricular things, I'm assuming, than to focus on getting the job done?
Yeah, well, I credit that also to sports. I was privileged enough to be a part of some great teams, in high school, and I learned a lot about conditioning and being ready for the game, and you condition yourself and condition your mind, your body. That Friday you got a big game, Monday through Thursday you need to be preparing for the game, and I just took that mentality and applied it to business, and it's really that simple. And when you get into the game, you call a play, you run a play, it's going to the shooting guard. You got to do your job and set a screen, pass it to the shooting guard, and he'll get the bucket. And it's the same in business. Every great organization, from McDonald's to any other organization, financial, whatever, they have key team members that make sure that at the end of the day, the job is done. So.
Mm-hmm. And the delegation and trust in the people doing their jobs and holding them accountable at such an early age. How did you develop that?
Well, you know what? One thing I learned about Miss Brundage, I used to wonder why was she at work at 16, 18 hours a day. And as great as a entrepreneur as she was, great as a leader as she was, I knew early that we didn't have the right team, early, to delegate, and she can just go home and focus on other things. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I learned early that I didn't want to work 18 hours a day either. And that was one thing that I just took back and said, when I get my own thing together, I'm going to always try to find the best people to work so I can work smarter and not harder.
Right. That's good. So you're going through college. You get your degree, and what specific area did your degree in?
My degree is economics.
Okay.
Yeah, my degree is in economics, and I always loved the food business. So I actually have another degree as well. I got a culinary degree as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, going through that process of college, I just knew early. I actually thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but during college, my economics professor said, "Dennis, you don't write well enough to be a lawyer. You should probably think of something else." So I was kind of forced into entrepreneurship. At that point, I just said, "Man, maybe he doesn't think I'm smart enough." And he's a professor. He may not know he may know what he's talking about. So at that point, I just always had entrepreneurship as my only option, to get ahead. Really, to be honest with you. And really, I was making a lot of money in college, and I was the first person to graduate from college in my family. I really just wanted to stick it out to just, say, "Hey, family, I did this for you. Thank you for supporting me." But I just always knew I wasn't going to use my degree really in real life.
Mm-hmm. Any younger brothers and sisters?
I do. I have 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. I'm the oldest by 8 years. So only child for a long time, So,
so you set the standard for them to come along behind you.
Yeah, but I also learned how to play by myself, how to entertain myself, how to get things done myself. And, now I have a daughter 6 years old, and she's the only child. So I enjoy, leaving her in the room by herself and having her figure it out.
Great. So you have businesses for, let's see, you started to spinning your businesses after college. Is that moving into bigger and different things?
Yeah. So after college, I had moved out to LA. I really didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. The laundromat license and deal, I told you I put together, I sold it. I had some cash, and I just wanted to see the world. I was about 25 at that time. I didn't know what my next move was. I was dating a young lady who was into hair extensions. And we went to this fancy place in LA. And, I'm being a good guy. She's like, "Yeah, my hair extensions are like $500." I'm like, "What?" And we went to the store, and there was a line out the door, Mr. Tinsley. I said, "Wait, there's got to be something here. Like, why are everybody's like standing in line for this Indian hair?" So I did some research, and they told me, listen, I ran into one of the Indian vendors. He said, "Man, listen, LA is an okay market. But if you really want to be in this business, you need to go down to Atlanta, Georgia, because that's the number one market in the world right now for hair extensions. And I couldn't believe it. I called my friends in Detroit, and they say, yeah, we buy some hair extensions, but I hear Atlanta is where all the good stuff is. So I took a trip to Atlanta, and I never left. That was almost 20 years ago. I never left Atlanta since then. And I got into the hair business. And took a trip over to India. Then I took a trip to China and started buying hair. Brought it back to Atlanta, branded it, all the things I've learned from McDonald's and laundromat business, etc. I was also a Little Caesars franchisee for a minute, Subway too. But during that span, all the things I learned about branding and putting systems together, etc., I applied it to that business. It was called Queen Virgin Remy. We grew that business to 17 locations. And I sold it to what at that point was the largest, and today is still the largest manufacturer of hair accessories, etc., in the world.
Outstanding. That's a very interesting story. So what made you decide you wanted to move it? Was it just an offer you couldn't refuse?
Well, a few things.
Okay.
Mr. Tinsley, they definitely made us a good offer. But, I want to take all the credit, but we, at that point, we did a really good job of branding the business, and the barrier of entry wasn't as high at our peak as it was when we first started. There are websites out there that just came on the market, like Alibaba, etc., that made it very easy for anybody who really wanted to get in the business to just click a button and they could say, hey, I'm selling here. It wasn't the best quality, but it made it very difficult to keep, our growth, same trajectory that it was. And it also kind of stayed in the industry. So they came and caught me at the right time because business was getting saturated to a point where it made it hard to continue to compete.
Mm-hmm. So you sold that business, and then the next move, what was your next move?
My next move was the original hot dog factory. Being born and raised in Detroit, anybody knows that we love chili dogs, right? We call them Coney Islands. And down south, I really noticed quickly as I traveled around the country that there wasn't any real good places for hot dogs. Nathan's existed, but really only in airports, etc. And I wanted to bring that part of the food experience around the country. So we started in Atlanta. We grew pretty fast. We grew to 15 or so locations. And one of my best franchise partners is, he said, Dennis, I love the business, but I think I can do it better than you. And I said, okay, make me an offer. He made me an offer, and I sold it to him. So that's how that exited. And I wasn't mad at that either.
Yeah. Were these brick and mortars?
Brick and mortar locations, yes, sir.
Okay. That's not. Don't get mad at him, right?
No. Look, he was a smart guy, great family. He was a finance guy, and I took him up on this offer. Mm-hmm. And the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. So your next move, what's after that?
I met a guy. His name is Greg George. He was known as a franchise builder and a salesman. And he came into my office and said, "Man, listen, I see what you're doing with the Original Hot Dog Factory. I have some ideas. I have some businesses across the country that need your help. Together, I think we can do some good business." I said, "Okay, Greg, what do you got?" So we rode down to a little small town in North Carolina. At that time, there were some federal regulations around hemp, right? Hemp is really just, in short, a marijuana that just won't get you high. It's really used for medicinal purposes, pains, etc. And we got into the hemp business. We walked into a little shop at the time called Carolina Hemp Company. A family was taking this hemp and producing some amazing products. Me and Greg said, let's franchise it. We franchised it right at the start of what was considered the hemp gold rush. We built 12 locations, and we sold that business within a year back to one of the original investors of Carolina Hemp Company. Mm-hmm. And that was an amazing ride. Learned a lot. That business at the time was a wild, wild west. And, that was probably one of the fastest exits I've done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still a little wild, wild west, would you say?
I think so. The business is changing fast, new rules every day. Not at the point and say, well, maybe we should just, legalize marijuana. It really is a a fast moving business, and if you don't know the law, you can get burned.
I have a nephew that is now the president and CEO of a company up in Philadelphia area, New Jersey area, that they run that whole market up there with the hemp business. It does real well. Excuse me. Question that I would like to ask you in an answer for those that are viewing the program that are youngsters that are just getting into business. They want to become franchisees, or they want to franchise a business. You mentioned how you guys went in and started franchising the business. What would you, guidance wise, would you give those listening in that they're getting into something and then all of a sudden they want to franchise it? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think Mr. Tinsley, 2026 is all about the brand. It is all about the brand. Okay. You look at what you go to Amazon's website, and whatever you think your favorite brand is, Levi jeans, whatever, I guarantee you Amazon has a very close replica of Levi's jeans. Mm-hmm. It's the same product. It feels the same. And Amazon probably is a lot cheaper. But the reason why you may buy Levi's versus Amazon is because you can tell people I'm wearing Levi's jeans. With AI, et cetera, out here, the next 10 years, next 15 years is all about the depth of expertise. With AI, nobody will really know more than the next person, but it's going to be all about, can I build a brand and can I execute the brand? That's what it's going to be about, for the next 10 years. So if I'm a franchisee today, I wouldn't worry about how good the food is. I would worry about the operating procedures and how strong their brand is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And give us a little insight, your feelings on AI and what you've just said as far as competition is concerned with the brands or with the particular concept.
Yeah, I mean, I just look, AI has ushered in a new age of intelligence. And if you look at the news, especially in the hospitality business, these places are closing down left and right, 200, 300, 400 locations at a time. And it's not because, the food is bad. The brands are just dying at a fast rate. It's so easy for somebody to come in. The very entry to open a restaurant nowadays is a lot lower than it was 15, 20 years ago. I mean, even for McDonald's, right? You had to have a certain net worth. You couldn't talk to McDonald's if you didn't have $1 million.
Right.
Nowadays, if you have a name or a brand attached to yourself, you can probably get some of those deals done. So, I would say, Mr. Tinsley, in 10 years, 15 years, nobody may be in the kitchen. It may be all robots, right? So, it's going to be all about execution, brand, and really just following the rules, I believe.
Yeah. I had a guy on podcast last week, as a matter of fact, that created an AI program. He's a former professional hockey player, created an AI program out on the West Coast that he's introducing that will just about eliminate all the management labor. And it does everything for a restaurant or a restaurant group, to your point that you just raised. And that's probably the first I've heard personally of that kind of AI intelligence entering into that space. So I agree with you that it is definitely coming.
It's coming.
Some of us old heads might have a little problem in trying to get a grip around it and a trust factor around it. But
listen, 5 years ago, kiosks, 6 years ago, kiosks didn't even exist. I remember people saying, Dennis, why you bring kiosks in here? People want to talk to people.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit, but the future is coming and it's coming fast. Now you go into restaurants, cashier's not even there. You're pressing the button, you're putting your order in, and food is coming out the side door. Yeah. So,
I have Wendy's restaurants, and you can pull up to the drive-through now, and AI takes over. It
takes over. They'll talk to you what your order is, and you pull up.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's good. So any website information, anything that you want the audience to see, we could take a moment to put it up, and any kind of audience you want to reach as far as communicating with. I think the things that you're doing are dynamic, and I think that more people need to know who Dennis McKinley is and some of the things that you're doing.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. One of my latest ventures was music exchange. I've always loved music, and my daughter is 6 years old. And when she was born, we had a real hard time finding music that she liked. And, I said, let me just create my own music. That was 6 years ago. And that's how I'm at rollingout.com now. Rolling Out, which is a 25-year-old brand that just really loves Black culture and Black media. It was founded by Munson Steve. He wanted to get in the music business. He saw what we were doing at Music Exchange, and he said, you know what, is that brand for sale? He acquired Music Exchange, all of our technology and all of our artist roster, and that's what I'm doing now. We're looking for, the creators, musicians, hosts, showrunners, producers. If you have any, great ideas, contact us at Rolling Out. You can reach me directly, dennis@rollingout.com. Tell me about your ideas. Let us know how you're changing, music and culture in Black America, and we would be happy, to talk to you about your ideas.
Mm-hmm. That's great. You mentioned your daughter. Tell us about your family, whatever you want to share with us.
Yeah, well, my daughter is 6. She's a true Taurus. She is aggressive. She loves to learn, and I'm just excited about the future and what direction that she'll take. Her dad loves food. She loves to get in the kitchen and put her apron on. So, Mr. Tinsley, as a kid to a young lady that loves to cook, she just really, really makes me smile. Hopefully, maybe she'll be one of America's next top chefs. Who knows? Who
knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're married. And you're married to?
I'm not married, but her mom is a big personality. Her mom is Portia Williams. She's a reality TV star on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. So I would tell you that she has a big personality, and she gets it from her mother.
Okay. That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, it's been a true pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I think that everyone will benefit from the conversation and all that you've accomplished in your young manhood, and that there's a lot of great things to come. I wish you all the best. You're right there in hot Atlanta, and that's the place to be. So we appreciate you being on the program.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Mr. Tinsley, congrats on your illustrious career, and talk anytime offline about the food business. It's a tough business, but if you do it right, it can bring tremendous, wealth and extreme satisfaction. So your franchisee out there, definitely, read to Mr. Tinsley's newest book, and it'll provide you with some motivation to get you to your next step for sure.
Thank you for that plug. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today on Catch as Catch Can, Turning Obstacles to Opportunity. We've had a great guest, Dennis McKinley, and just listening to his brief story on the podcast, I think there's a lot more that he'll be writing his books here if he hasn't already started on them that will help you also. So thank everyone for participating in our podcast today. And Dennis, thank you again. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.
This has been Catch as Catch Can. The game isn't over. Your success story is just getting started. Head to tinsleyspeaks.com for exclusive content, resources, and opportunities. Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., a production of Live Stream Editors.